It's my great pleasure to have with us today distinguished All Anandian Ambassador Ravinatha Aryasinha. Let me give a brief introduction about Ambassador Ravinatha Aryasinha. Ambassador Ravinatha Aryasinha holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in Philosophy, Politics and Economics from the University of Peradeniya and the Master of Arts degree in International Relations from the University of Colombo. He was a Fellow in International Relations of the School of International Service, American University, Washington, D.C. in 2001 to 2002. Having joining the Sri Lanka Foreign Service in 1988, he was the Foreign Secretary of Sri Lanka, serving from October 2018 to August 2020. As Foreign Secretary, former Ambassador Aryasinha led the Sri Lanka delegation for the 74th UN General Assembly in September 2019, the first time a Sri Lankan Foreign Secretary has addressed the UNGA during a high-level segment. Other positions the former Ambassador Aryasinha have held include Second Secretary in the Sri Lanka High Commission in New Delhi, India in 1989 to 1991. On leave from the SLFS as National Information Officer in the Office of the UN Resident Coordinator in Sri Lanka 1993 to 1995 and Director Publicity and Foreign Ministry Spokesman in 1995 to 2000. He served in the Sri Lankan Embassy in the USA 2002 to 2006, where during the latter period he was the Deputy Chief of Mission from 2007 to 2008. He was the Director General in the Public Communication Division and Foreign Ministry Spokesman. From 2008 to 2012, he was the Sri Lankan Ambassador to Belgium, Luxembourg and to the European Union. Mr. Aryasinha retired from the public service in September 2021 at the age of 60 years. Let me begin with Mr. Aryasinha. How could you recall your childhood, parents and your other members of the family?
Very pleasantly. My father happened to be also an old Anandian, and he was a metallurgist in the metallurgical department. My mother was a teacher, and so we grew in a family which had an orientation towards both academics as well as social involvement. And till my father's passing, he served on the OBA committee actually at that time. So in school, to go into Ananda was a natural thing. And at Ananda, what I tried to do was to take advantage of the school's approach at the time. I joined in 1967, grade 1. Colonel Rajapaksa came in 69 as principal. And I left just a year before he left. I left in 80 and he left just thereabouts. So my period was largely the Rajapaksa period. And that period allowed us, not just myself, my colleagues as well, to experiment with things. And it was one where was not only bookish, but also a lot of extracurricular activities. And I think people who remember me from school days probably remember me very much for the debating which we did. At the time we won both the English and Sinhala debating championships. For the first time I think we won an English debating championship. Then in athletics was another area. I was also the president of the Students' Council, which gave a lot of leadership ability to us to experiment. The other thing I think which helped me tremendously was I played one sport, and that was athletics. And I think that I liked it particularly because it was a team sport, and it gave you the opportunity to work with others. I was a long and triple jumper, but I also captained the house, was athletic secretary, and it brought a certain degree of cohesion. And I say this because I find that in our jobs today, very often, one reason if we do a little better, I think it is because we know how to lead. And leading is not you doing everything. It's easy to do everything, but it's more difficult to get a team, a pack together and go forward. And I think I give a lot of credit to that, to the teaching and the example or the pushing which we got at Ananda, Colonel Rajapaksa in particular, but also Venerable Divyaga Yasassi and Habarakadi Indraratana in their times. Also, we had the privilege of having great teachers like Prefect of Games Ranjit Vitana and Lanal Mendis, and many teachers in our younger days. But then to me, towards the latter part, I think since I did arts and political science, Mrs. Padma Ekanayaka was someone very special. So we brought, and Mrs. Mallika Abepala, who was in charge of the Students' Council. So I think we, and Mrs. Prajna Sena. So I think we were a mix of all these things, and I think that is something our time also, it was, education was very competitive, but nevertheless we found time to do all these things. We were scolded by our parents at the time that we were concentrating too much on extracurricular, but in a way I think I'm glad we did that, because exams you can pass and we've done okay academically, but what you can't do so easily is to understand at a young age how you work with people. And I find that people whom you don't know at all, you get thrown in, you know. So I think that's an important lesson which Ananda gave us, not just to me, but when you look around other spheres as well, many of us have turned out to be good at what we did, and that's what I think is important.
Yeah.
Let me add one more thing, and we were good at what we did, and we were also, I think Ananda also gave us a certain sense of, if you like, stubbornness when you saw something which was not right, and to speak out. And I think that is something which sometimes you have to do in spite of the costs it might bring you immediately, but long term it gives you credibility, it gives you, your image is intact, and when people realize that you can't be pushed around, they probably don't push you around, and that has been my experience. And sometimes you may not be loved, but that's all right, so long as you're respected for what you're doing. And I believe that with that you can go on to do more for society and for the colleagues working with you than if you just bent over on everything you were told. And that too, I think, came from Ananda to, learn to take a few brick baths and few knocks, fall a little, but get up.
Ravinatha, we found that immediately after your school career, we understand you joined media industry. And kindly tell us what made you to be there, and also your accomplishments.
Well, I joined the media industry really by accident. I finished my A-levels and was hanging around in school. And I must pay tribute to a past president of the OBE, Ranapala Bodhinagoda, who happened to be someone of my father's vintage. And I was involved, I think, with OBA stuff. And he said, Pudha, what are you doing? And I think I told him, so I'm waiting my results. And he said, why don't you come and do some work at Lake House? And so I went till the results came, and those days results took a good 6 months to come. And by the time the results came, I had put in a good 6 months at Lake House at Daily News. And I was lucky to kind of be the second reporter who covered both the President and the Prime Minister at the time, Jaya Jayawardena and Prime Minister Ranasinghe Premadasa, President Jaya and Prime Minister. And why was that? Because I was bilingual. And there weren't too many even at that time who could be bilingual. So I had to listen to speeches in English, Sinhala, and write it in English for the Daily News. So I think, so that gave us this. So by the time my results came and I passed and I got selected to go in to do arts at the university, I was doing very well as a journalist. And I then had also in that period, they were trying to set up television in Sri Lanka, and they were trying to recruit the first group of television people. So I was selected for that. And then we were the first to set up Rupavahini, and so I felt that, rather than going to university at a time, university was mostly on strike, that it might be more prudent to hold on to my job, which was not just financially, but I had made a reputation in the work we did, and we were at Rupavahini doing some very pioneering work. So I decided to do an external degree, as you said, in political science, economics and philosophy from Peradeniya. So I did that and did my master's immediately after. And by 88, while my batchmates were probably still coming out of their BAs, I had finished my master's and was out. So that was, and we had a great time in journalism because we were young, we were all competitive, but we also were very united in working at projects. And it's a little bit of a continuity from Ananda, what we did to work. And I think we were better equipped to take the tumbles. The new thing was to have to deal with the politicians. But I think we did a very decent job with it at the time, because if you see our interviews of those days, we were quite serious, even though we were from a government institution. We would call the President Mr. President, we would cross-examine a question. And we did it in a way which was not offensive, and therefore there was no reprimand. And I think to be able to know to test those limits with a fairly decent moral compass, not to be bought over, not to be swayed for any kind of petty or substantive gain, was, I think, something important which we learnt at Ananda.
Ravinatha, lately you've taken a turn to change your career towards diplomatic career. What inspired you to choose the diplomatic sector as your career?
Well, interesting question which I get asked a lot of times. That I think was, I don't know, partly again accident, but partly I think there was a trajectory. Two things I would say mainly. One was that, you see, I would say that the primary reason I left Rupavahini was because at that time, if we were to pursue a career as a television journalist, and that's what I was not a newsreader, I was a reporter, correspondent, news editor and all that. So we had to continue to, if we wanted to go higher in the ladder, you couldn't go higher by being a reporter. Now in many Western countries, and I think now this is true even in Sri Lanka, you can be an interviewer and reporter and rise, and the money probably is there, the fame is probably there. But at Rupavahini at the time, you had to become a director and an executive director, and you had to go into the supervision side. And then you couldn't be the reporter you were. So you built your name as a reporter, but finally you were going to have to sit behind a desk. And I think that cheesed me off. I realized that it constrained the scope I had. And so that was the first reason. The second reason I think was academic, because I had done my academic work, and even my international relations masters was done really so that I am better equipped when I do interviews, and I did some serious ones with Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, Margaret Thatcher, Zia-ul Haq, Kenneth Kaunda, who were very big names at the time besides all the Sri Lankan leaders of that era. So that's why I did the international relations, but then I felt that it's nice watching it from the outside. Let's try and go in and do something. Of course, that was an exam, an all-island exam, where I think about, 1,005 or more sat that exam. And after several interviews in my batch, I came first in the batch of 1988. So it was a logical progression to go into the diplomatic field for those two reasons I mentioned. I don't know, maybe if we had a chance in television to, go down that road, I might still have been there. And I still feel that I'm very much a journalist at heart. And Foreign Ministry has used me very heavily in my period there to be doing a lot of the public relations, public diplomacy related aspects. And I think that that has been also good, because I have been able to marry my the two careers which I at that time knew.
Ravinatha, having been in the diplomatic career, what was your biggest challenge that you faced?
Well, I think if you are talking about the diplomatic career itself, I think, Rupavahini, we faced different types of challenges. But in the diplomatic career, I think I would say that, and I think that's how the country sees it, I would think, was the biggest challenge I faced was Geneva. My period as permanent representative in Geneva, my hair grew a little grey. It's still not too bad, but it probably, it was a very taxing period, but also a very fulfilling period, because you were trying to find a balance between the respect for human rights and at the same time pointing out the excess demands which were made on Sri Lanka. And I am someone who had over the years as a journalist, as a young diplomat, always gone north and been with the troops sometimes, associated with the big generals when I was quite young. So I had an appreciation for this conflict, and I tried to reflect on that. So on the one hand, I was keen to ensure that Sri Lanka is not seen as a country which is not respectful of human rights. That when something clearly wrong happens, that those must be corrected. Wrongdoers must be punished. But at the same time, human rights today has become an industry, and unfortunately sometimes it is used to subserve lots of other interests geopolitical interests, personal interests, regime interests, sometimes whims and fancies. So you had to resist those. And one thing I am happy about is that at the time I left as Foreign Secretary in August 2020, notwithstanding the tremendous pressure which Sri Lanka came under, we had managed to prevent a full-fledged investigation on Sri Lanka by the UN itself. There were reports by various people based on documents which came to them, but never one where the UN itself went and investigated. And I am happy that on my watch, both Geneva and Foreign Secretary, that we prevented that happening. Unfortunately, that happened in March 2021 when the HRC decided to have what they call a Sri Lanka accountability mechanism. So I was very conscious of preventing that happening, and I think that was probably the most significant thing which we managed to do, both through being PR and as Secretary. But I also think that the other important aspect was, I think, like I told you, I took over public diplomacy. I used to call it publicity then, as a very young 5-year senior person. At a time the LTT was at its height, and I was very fortunate to work with Minister Lakshman Kadiragama very closely with him, and I worked 6 years in that job at a stretch. Normally we kind of work 2 years here and go out, but each time came where I might have been going. Both the minister and I agreed that, you know, what I was doing was more important than anything I could go out and do. So we did fight back the LTT's propaganda to some extent, and I think our kind of showing the world what the LTT was in those late 1990s. And I must say also we had the advantage that at that time the government seemed a little more reasonable and amenable to trying to address the genuine concerns of the Tamils, and that helped as well. We had a story to tell, but we managed to tell that story. Then again, when we were in President Mahinda Rajapaksa's time, when we were going in the height of the last phase, I was once again Director General Public Diplomacy, and in that position we were able to again push back on the propaganda at the time. So I think that was another important aspect. The COVID time, particularly as Foreign Secretary, you get to do a much broader set of things. You have to work for the whole service, not on only a particular this thing. And I think we were able to shift policy to some extent, relating to human rights, to find ways of trying to move from an international mechanism or what they used to call a hybrid mechanism, to get it back in 2020 for the world to accept that if we do a domestic mechanism properly, that they would be willing to look at that. And we got that at that time. So policy-wise, we made a lot of changes. Structurally, you had a chance of, in my time, I took over at a time in the foreign service officers, only 37% of the ambassadors we had abroad. At the time I left, it was 57%. So we were able to get recognition to the service and to work together, giving the right person, capable people, proper positions. Another big challenge I think I faced, which I was prepared to from all my other experience, was COVID. And working through that period was something particularly both challenging but also very pleasing, because you were helping somebody overcome a problem, and you had big decisions to make, and sometimes...
Ravinatha, which supporting skills do you think are most important when it comes to a leadership?
Well, I think, you see, I always reflect, and I tell this very often when our friends gather, and these days we gather a lot more, I think, and I'm glad, because I have actually been out of the country a lot, and therefore I have missed getting together with my classmates and, joining in on... They regularly do that. So since coming back, that is the one plus thing. I've been doing two things. One, since retirement, I've been working on a PhD, which I started some time ago when I came back from Geneva, but then I was made secretary and I couldn't pursue it. So I'm getting back to that with vengeance, because I felt that there is an academic streak in me which I had never been able to pursue. I have done my work, respectful of academic work, but it's nice to sit back and focus on it, something I've never had for 40 years. So now I have the time and I'm focusing on that. The other thing is, I think we are trying to do some work in relation to school. Particularly, I'm in the OBA naturally and work with them, but through the organization of Old Anandians Professional Forum, we have started some projects, and particularly the Pasmahala, the science block, which is being renovated, and the 10 floors are going to, 10 sections are going to be also different things, and I'm working these days on with a group of other former journalists to try to develop the media side of that, to have a media center, because we feel that we were trained in some way in media from the time we started announcing and doing the news bulletins at Ananda. I think I started it when I was about grade 7. Pravritti Prakasha, and in both Sinhala and English, So I think I have always been very conscious of giving back, but this gives us an opportunity to try to encourage younger students to think about careers a little earlier, and also when they are capable, for us to network. With a phone call, it's not too difficult. We have earned enough respect in this country to be taken seriously, and if I call someone and say, there's this young guy who is, I think he has promise, I'm sure at least he'll give an interview, let them decide if he's good or not. But we are trying to use that leverage we have from whatever reputation we have earned, I think, the credibility and the esteem, to try to help Anandians and to help anybody, not just Anandians. I mean, I'm not so hung on, only school. I mean, to me, all Sri Lankans are equally important. School is just a tag. But to give back and contribute. So those are the two things I'm doing now. And I think whatever we have done in terms of leadership, we did it from school. Main thing, I think, to answer your specific question is to be able to work with others and carry them all to a goal. And that means very clearly that only what you say is not going to fly. You have to bring people around you to appreciate what you are saying, be convinced if possible, or also be receptive to listening to someone else and adjusting what you are trying to do, incorporating their ideas. They may not be saying something very useful, but still the fact that you hear them out, I think, is very important. And I think sadly, I don't know whether it's that we are so rushed these days, whether it's the technology that we get most of our information off our smartphones, we don't communicate with each other, but in some way, I find that, and I say this with no offense, even with my younger colleagues, that people are not ready to have a good fight of ideas, so that the best argument wins the day. You can't throw rank at that. You can't say, I'm the foreign secretary, so shut up and do what I'm saying. You can, that's how often it happens, but it's smarter to hear people out, take what you can in. If they are wrong, explain to them why they are wrong. Those decisions become better. You can't carry everybody. Naturally, there will be people who have different views, because society has become fairly ruthless, and everybody wants to have it all. You have to understand that you can't have it all. You have to pass on some and fight for what is most important to you, while also sharing what is less important to others. That's a lesson for life, as much as it's in diplomacy, that no country can do everything the way they want. It's a compromise. Life is a compromise. And I think that is what I have learned, and that's what I've tried to practice. And I hope that in the interactions I have today, I'd be able to, with having walked the talk, share that thought with other people as well.
Ravinatha, presently, did you engage with any academic work?
Yeah, so as I said, I'm working since retirement. I have been working on a PhD. I'm working on a PhD at the Faculty of Graduate Studies of the Columbia University. I'm also doing some teaching particularly on the international relations area, and a little bit on journalism. So that's the stuff I'm doing.
Ravinatha, what advice would you give to present students at Mother Ananda as a distinguished senior All Ananda?
My sense is that, you see, I can only tell what my children tell me, which is, your age was those days, you don't understand the present times. And I guess that's what students would tell us of nowadays. So I am not very good at trying to give advice, because my advice is a bit archaic at the present time. What I am more interested in is to talk about skills you develop. Because, you see, Principal G.W. Rajapaksa never told us how to do something. He gave us the skill to do it. And I now see the merit of it. He must have been looking at it the same way I am looking at my children or Anandians of today. I think what is important is that you get those bricks, the building blocks. Number one, to work together, like I just said, that you can't do it alone. Okay. Secondly, in the same way that you have to learn to compromise, because to carry everybody else along. Okay, not necessarily because you want to be a nice guy, but because it is the practical way of getting things done. Third, you must learn to lose and take it in stride. I think I got it from athletics. Debating, we didn't lose very much, but athletics occasionally we lost. And that makes you understand how you move on with it. Yes, you sulk, you're angry, all that. But then next day you get up and go, Because if you don't know to do that, and I characterized this once when I was Foreign Secretary, I was invited to talk to the senior batch, not the batch, the batch tops who were going to university. And I said, I think, and parents also there, and I think I said something which is very pertinent to the current day of how to handle younger people. I don't know Generation X's and Y's and all that. I'm grappling to understand whether there is some real difference in these. I understand scientifically there are different things, because I guess what would we have done if we also had a smartphone? We wouldn't have had a lot of the interactions we would have had. We'd be interacting with the smartphone. So what I told these students, and more the parents, was that my parents nurtured me and brought me up, and my teachers as well, not to not fall. You know, no attend neme. Vatunot negative. Vatanakotu oduwadda gannathu attend. You know, api dan daruwa hadanne no attend. ඒ තින් ඒ දරුවෝ වැටුනහම ඒ දරුවෝ නැගිටින්න දන්නේ නැහැ. ඒ නිසා නොයෙකුත් ලොකු ප්‍රශ්න වලට මුහුණ පාන්න වෙනවා. And I think that that's in some way, and having lived abroad for a long time, whether it's America or Europe, the children now love to kind of take a little bit of heat, you know. They are not given everything on a platter, and this goes in Sri Lanka whether you are rich or poor. It doesn't make a difference. But I think it is very important that you allow children to kind of, you know, take a little bit of heat when they are young, because that is when they learn how to deal with adversity, because life is half good and half bad. And if you don't know how to deal with adversity, then you won't survive to succeed. It is only, you know, you're sitting and talking about my success only because I was able to deal with the adversity I faced. Maybe personal, maybe professional, maybe, you know, broader. But that, I think, to current day students, I think is what I would tell most, that to start learning to deal with adversity. What happens when things go wrong? When things go right, it's easy, you know. And in some funny way, I think the present crisis makes all of us deal with that. Maybe the younger generation is not used to it, but we are used to it because we have faced it. And I think that some way, අර temperado වෙන ගතිය තියෙනවා නම් මම හිතන්නේ ජීවිතයේ ඕන දෙයක්කට මුහුණ දෙන්න පුළුවන්. If you are not seasoned, like a cricket bat, if you are not seasoned, you are not equipped to face the world. So I think that is my message to children. Also naturally study as well as do a good mix of extracurricular. May not be as possible to do as much as we used to do. We were crazy those days about it, but I think it's important that you find that balance so that you just don't become a nerd or just become a sports person who doesn't, at the end of it, you know, how many Arjuna Ranatungas are there. Everybody can't play for the Sri Lanka team. So you have to balance the academics and the extracurricular. And I think Ananda, in our time, equipped you for it. I'm sure there is something special Ananda still does. But to get the best of Ananda, you also have to start thinking and behaving like an Anandian. Not just going to Ananda is not enough. So that is my message to Anandians.
Ravinatha, thank you for joining us today and having your valuable time with us.